All right, guys, can you hear me? Raise your hands. Just one sound check. All right, so about 25%, that's good. We'll try and talk a little loud for you. This is a very important topic. I can promise you this, there's going to be more and more content out there. So it's going to be very, very important that content creators are differentiating themselves, publishers are differentiating themselves, have some very smart people up here. I'm going to let them give you a little background behind the companies that they're with, and then we're going to dive right in here. So we'll get going. Go ahead and get started.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sachin Kamdar, CEO of Parsley. And at Parsley, what we do is we allow people to grow an engaged and loyal audience through a series of data and analytics products. We work with both brands and publishers across the world.
Hi, I'm Fiona Campbell. I'm head of BBC News Mobile and Online. That's the website and all of BBC News on social platforms.
Hi, I'm Greg Mason. Purch is a marketplace-centered publisher, and what that means is we do content and commerce at scale. We own about 25 different brands. We reach 100 million people a month, and most of our revenue doesn't come from advertising. It comes from commerce facilitation. So we facilitate over $1 billion in commerce a year.
Awesome. And I'll stick with Greg down here, because honestly, I was a little surprised. The more I got to know about you backstage, it was really unique. Like, you guys are a huge company, and a lot of people haven't heard of the company. And so get some insight on what makes you guys unique as a company and as a publisher.
Well, I think how we've thought differently about the development of the business is in some respects, we've thought about the marketplace first as opposed to the brand. That might sound a little strange coming from a publisher, but we felt that the evolution required in traditional media and publishing models is so severe that you have to think differently. You have to think beyond advertising, and that's what we've done. And so most of our revenue is coming from performance marketing style solutions that we're creating for marketers, resulting in highly performant style relationships and a very high sticky value in terms of the value proposition we're offering for marketers.
Awesome. And now going to the BBC. What's keeping the BBC relevant? I mean, things are changing, so give background.
We've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and when we formed the mobile and online division, our sort of guiding light mission has been to engage the female audiences, engage the younger audiences, and engage the audiences who are less well off. In Britain, my main focus at the moment is in that British audience. So we launched a new content stream called BBC Stories, which I'd encourage you all to check out. And it is really focused on that under 34 and female audience. So at the moment it's running a mental health show called Like Minds. So although the BBC obviously is world renowned for its daily news service, we are redefining what news means and ensuring that we're tapping into the relevancy for those female and younger audiences. And we've really seen through on-site engagement and people tracking, commenting, sharing, taking action off the back of that BBC Stories content, that there's a really loyal audience for us there who might not necessarily be seen as that traditional core BBC readership.
Okay, awesome. So I want to hit on personalization. This is something that's pretty important to me because I always hate it when I feel like people aren't really talking to me. So let's cover personalization first. Obviously, you, super analytical company. What are you doing with personalization right now?
So personalization is important. I think it's important to recognize the role that it's playing, not just with your brands and the publishers that are out there, but the way that it's happening on platforms too. Pretty much every single platform over the past couple of years, and I think even Snapchat just announced yesterday that they're going to have an algorithmic feed for how they show content. So now, as a consumer, you have to expect that you're going to see the things that you want. You're getting trained this way by Twitter, by Facebook, by Snapchat. And so when we think about our own brands, when we think about our own publishers, we have to make sure that that experience marries over to the site that they go to as well, the apps that they experience. And so at Parsley, we try to enable that through our products, but we also try to help people think about personalization, not just from the lens of a black box, just throw an algorithm at it and see what happens, but how does personalization meet your own key objectives, and what can it do to help you grow your audience overall?
And at the BBC, we have what's called My BBC, which is driven through iPlayer and Radio iPlayer, where people now sign in to those products. And we have found that it's very successfully, over 18 million people have signed up to My BBC. we don't. That is not our main metric. 9 million or over 9 million now of those people are active weekly returning visitors to that My BBC product. I just checked yesterday coming here, and something that's really interesting is actually the BBC News app. Over half the people who use the app personalize the content stream, and BBC Stories is within that. So I think personalization is a very core public service for the audience. You're giving them what's relevant to them and what they're interested in. So it's working well for us.
Yeah, I think engagement is a holy grail, and we use Parsley. It's a great service, but even more importantly, we've made a major investment in business intelligence so that we're taking every imaginable data signal internally against our existing audience, but also external signals as well to help inform how we can drive that personalization process. And it's critical. A lot of publishers, a lot of big media companies and publishers, they give personalization a lot of lip service, but they really haven't, in many respects, made the necessary investments to drive the kind of insights to really deliver against personalization at scale.
I will just add one more thing, which is I think as the world gets more algorithmic and more personalized, if you're thinking about breaking through the noise, the one thing that you shouldn't ignore is bringing a human touch and kind of humanity overall to the experience that your individuals are coming to see. And so that might be a way to break through the noise, is maybe don't go personalized in front, put editorial and humans front and center as a way to fight back against the world becoming personalized or algorithmic overall.
Do any of you guys have examples? Because I love that point. That's something that humanizing brands, like that human-to-human connection, is an absolute differentiator for people. If you feel connected to a reader or to anybody, you feel closer. So is there any examples that you've seen that you're like, wow, what an amazing human-to-human connection?
Go ahead.
So we were experimenting last year with a content stream within BBC Stories called Like That, and it was firmly aimed at non-professional, so more administrative retail female audience, just to see the level of engagement the BBC as a traditional brand could get with them. And we did a piece of content on smear tests, because obviously there was concern in the UK that the take-up of smear tests was falling off amongst young women. And it was quite incredible the level of interaction that piece got in terms of health professionals reminding young women on the thread how important it was to have a smear test, and beyond that, young women then organising amongst themselves to go in a group to have an appointment to have the check. So, I just think that there's great public service and action potential beyond this as well, where you're adding to people's knowledge and needs, and it can be very liberating for them now.
One of the things that I'm seeing is that, specifically in the publisher world, is that more and more publishers are thinking about events and how events play a role in actually building a human-to-human touch or connection between them. One in particular is Billy Penn. They're a local news site. They're in a Spirited Media as the parent company, and they're in a few different areas in the US. And they have events that they create every month, every couple of months, and I've been to one, and the loyalty and the connection that they have between themselves and their audience is phenomenal. They just are able to put a face to the name of the people that are creating the content, and I think that's a great way to kind of build that human connection is with events.
That's awesome.
And I would say a key point within that is when we're running these tests, the journalistic creators behind them are completely on it and completely engaged and tuned in to every interaction they receive, and I think that's really key, because people can cut through whether you're really listening to their message and in their world, seeing it how they see it. So it's that's where having the right talent behind it is key. Gotcha.
Yeah, you made a really good point there, and we're going to have Eric from Inc. speak later, but they're a perfect example of content creators for years. I've always enjoyed their events, but it's a perfect example of how effective publishers are trying to humanize the brand through events. And so, speaking of brands that are publishers, and something that stands out to me is how brands are now publishers. It's crazy that in this last 10 years, obviously you had the John Deere, one of the first kind of brands as publishers back in the early 1900s, but now, literally the other day I saw a convenience store that was now a publisher. It was like Jimmy's Convenience Store has their own blog site that they're engaging people. I was blown away. I was like, well, wow, this is amazing how almost every company or brand is coming up to be their own publisher. Where do you see like really the future of that? Is it affecting you guys a lot? Did you see it growing? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I really think about it as a race, and the race is between brands building audiences, loyal audiences of self, going direct to consumer, and the other race is publishers getting good at building products. If you think about it the way that it exists right now, publishers are really great at building audiences. In some cases, they're not so great at building products to extract value out of that audience. On the brand side, they're really great at building products and getting revenue out of it, but they're not so good at building audiences. And so for so long, there's been a symbiotic relationship where brands would kind of co-opt the audiences of publishers, and publishers would be able to make money through advertising. But that's kind of going away, and platforms are playing a whole nother role in that kind of happening as well. And so the question that I have is, who is going to get to the finish line first? Will publishers be able to build enough products in and around their audience to get the full value of the audience that they're creating? Or will brands build the audiences that they want first, and then publishers are not going to have that advertising revenue stream that they've had traditionally? And that's the kind of way I think about it.
Cool. Awesome.
I think, obviously the BBC is a public service organization. I note, as we're emphasizing the youth audience and the female audience, it's an increasingly competitive environment because many people are becoming their own brand, and that's all adding to the competitive atmosphere that we're all playing in. I think it's good. It keeps us all on edge, but it does feel as if it's a bit of a race with everybody converging at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think this is necessarily surprising or conflicting for either the brands or for the publishers in this case. We're seeing this big trend towards CRM, customer relationship management, in all industries, in all walks of life. And brands naturally are trying to go beyond that one-time sale and develop a long-term relationship. Publishers are also doing the same thing, and they have to now think a lot harder about that than they ever did before, because we're moving into this sort of post-eyeball world and CPM-based sponsored world. And so I think it's a very healthy time for publishers to think not only about the development of their brands, but the development of their brands as services. And what are services that naturally extend from the topic or the subject matter that's resident in that brand? And how can they potentially use that service in some respects to both drive more engagement and get more loyalty to their brand, at the same time to help them diversify business models as well?
So yesterday we had a really great panel, and one of the questions was about metrics, how they're measuring success and engagement. 5 years ago, when I was having meetings with publications or brands, it was all on views. It was all these very, honestly, fluff metrics. But now, yesterday they said time on site, time actually on the article. They said returning readers, like it was changing the way, and obviously that's going to affect advertising, affect a ton of things. But ultimately, the goal is to develop a real relationship. So what are you doing? What are you seeing to develop that real relationship with the reader?
Sure. I think one important thing to recognize as we're moving forward in both the publishing and the brand space is that companies are just getting more diverse in general. What might work for one company in terms of a business model or in terms of success metric is going to be totally different for another company. And so ultimately that means there is no silver bullet metric that's going to cover the scope of the entire industry. And what's really important is to understand what you're trying to achieve and then to build the metrics behind it. So if you're really concentrated on building a premium subscription, things like engagement and loyalty are going to matter. The fact of the matter is that though views might be outdated, it still pairs pretty well with advertising. And that is still a way to kind of evaluate what's happening on content overall. And so what we're seeing happening is that there's a divergence in the industry overall where people are thinking differently about how to evaluate their site, how to align their goals, and then ultimately how data and platforms around data can help do that for them.
Yeah, we are looking at active weekly users and also time spent. So our major emphasis is on trying to get people to come back and explore in greater depth what we have to offer. And we're testing a number of things at the moment. So something, for example, during the North Korea crisis, we had a link to a previous Radio 4 show in a piece, and it was just really interesting because that show was driven back into the top 20 radio shows on the BBC iPlayer. So I think those are the kind of things we're testing where we can add value to a story and direct people somewhere else with it, because the BBC has a lot of amazing content. So we're trying to mine those linkages and that mapping for different audiences. It's key, you know, because we have a public service, and it is obviously to reach everyone, women, young, the less well off, not just the metropolitans.
So engagement is huge, measuring engagement is huge. We developed a proprietary engagement index that basically weights and ranks different forms of engagement on a page. In some respects, we feel like time spent, page views, at least in our case, are relatively useless metrics. Whereas what we try to reward is ideas such as, geez, did someone feel strongly enough about this article that they wanted to sign up for a newsletter? Did they share the article? Did they click on a buy button? All of those sort of activities have different ranks in the index. This gets extended to the entire editorial team at Purch, in that they're compensated based on their ability to grow that engagement score for their brand over a given period of time. So really, really huge. I mean, to the point of sort of defining what simple metrics you can create that will really move the needle for the business is a really hard exercise in some respects. And we have to be really cautious about utilizing some of the age-old metrics that might result in unintended consequences. So for instance, if you measure someone on page views per visit, right, you could find that your editorial teams all of a sudden are producing a whole bunch of slideshows that may have no real value in the grand scheme of things. But you know, if that's the measure, you know, that's what you'll get basically.
Awesome. So we've got a couple minutes left. Something a stat that stood out to me recently was, I think it was, there was going to be a growth of 300% in internet traffic, at least in the next 3 to 5 years. That's huge. I always thought it was there was already enough of it, but there's going to be a lot more. How do you think, there's a lot of different content creators and people that should be creating content in the room. What can they do right now to start differentiating themselves?
Yeah, I was also just reading a study, I think in eMarketer, where it said that the expected amount of time spent per person on a daily basis was around 12 hours. 12 hours is where it's going to go to as an individual with digital media. So that's a lot of time people are spending with digital media, and that means that they're interacting it. Not only are they going to see digital media, they're going to interact with it with different ways. Like, you're probably going to see different companies here that are showing you augmented reality and virtual reality and different experiences of how they're interacting with digital media. And so I think what's really important is to think about, well, okay, if 12 hours a day is going to encompass how much time we're spending with it, how do I make sure that I am going to be on the variety of different platforms out there that are going to showcase my content? So that means working with the big partners like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. That means thinking forward about what other technologies are going to be out there and trying to get ahead of the curve so that your content can live on these different places.
Yeah, I would just say you've got to be true to your voice, and you've got to get your voice in the right place. Simple as that.
Awesome.
Good, I think we're out of time.
Oh, yeah, we got a negative here. So thanks for coming, guys. Honestly, they're very kind people. I spent a lot of time backstage with them, so we'll probably mosey over here if you have any additional questions. But thanks for having us.
Thank you.